Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Facebook. Good morning, Blog Talk Radio. Good morning, YouTube. Good morning. Awesome. We are going to get started. Ooh, we're going to talk this morning. Let's see who's going to join us. We are going to get started. Of course, we have our trusty co-host with us. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Midterms, white fragility and black and brown opportunity. Today is Friday, August the 3rd. This is a pivotal time in history. White fear and white fragility in this Trump presidency is an opportunity for black and brown people to make major shifts in policy. The black and brown vote in this upcoming midterm elections could swing this country in a direction that changes the course of our present history. What do black and brown people and our white allies need to do to make this happen? That's what we're going to be talking about this morning. We're going to bring in my trusty co-host, Mr. David Slavin, PhD, always talking about acknowledging the divide. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Tamira.
How are you
today?
Awesome. Good morning. We're going to bring in our other trusty co-host, Mr. John Armwood. We're always talking about withholding the vote and what that all means. They think we're out to just attack people, which is not the truth, John. We are intentional about holding our candidates and elected officials accountable to issues that affect black and brown communities. And white fragility, David, is real. So we think, but you don't think so.
No, I don't.
What is it, David?
I'm gonna kick over the whole shebang by saying that there's no such thing as white. Okay, we got to get rid of that whole language and framework and conception, and I'll talk about that some more. That's just a little tease, provocative statement, but I'll try to do what I can to explain what I mean by that as we move forward in our time together. Good morning, Barb.
David, can you hear Tamara? Because I don't.
Yeah. Can y'all hear me? Sorry.
Now I can.
Now y'all can hear me. That was a good morning from Barb.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Hopefully, no technical difficulties. We were all struggling this morning to get started and get going. So prayerfully, we have more technical difficulties. But lots going on this morning. You guys, did y'all read about what LeBron James did up in Akron, Ohio? Did y'all hear that?
Yes. Oh, yes. And
that's what I'm talking about, right, John?
All hail LeBron. That's what we need. Spend the money wisely, invest in the future of our youth, make a difference. That is just a wonderful thing. And it was so funny because one of the right-wing hosts had attacked him recently. And, people don't, understand. And I agree totally with David that race as a whole is a fiction. It's a political tool to divide and conquer. I'm with David 100% on that. Mm-hmm. There's no white, there's no black, there's no brown, there's no yellow. That's the human race. But it's a political tool to divide us. But LeBron was lifting people up, and he's going to be doing it for years to come. And I'm just so proud of him and so happy. Makes my heart want to flutter.
Yeah. I'm excited about the opportunities that I think black and brown people are on the verge of changing the course of this entire nation. Along with our white allies, we're on a course to change this entire nation, but we have to have hard, candid conversations. And, white fragility, David says he doesn't believe that it's real, but there's this sense of I don't want to, well, it is fear. It's a sense of fear, David, that they Trump is gonna destroy us, and all this fear that they're fragile. We're black and brown people aren't afraid of being broken. We always we like to be at the bottom. So white people are, this white fragility, I believe, is real, David.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the woman who coined the term, or at least popularized it in academic circles, Robin DiAngelo, just published a book called White Fragility, and I read an article by her, a journal, academic journal article by her about 8 years ago. So the book has come out now, and its subtitle is "Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism." And these are all terms that I at the very least, I want to, as the postmodernists say, deconstruct.
Break it down, David. Break it down.
And those include words like white identity, whiteness, allies, and other terms that I think are really based on a paradigm that is really a dead end and self-defeating for progressive people. So one of the things that I would be interested in talking about is how come we always talk about white people without breaking down the differences in class among different white European Americans. And I would prefer to use the term European American, just so that we get we get some sense that that there is something other than white identity going on with European Americans. People come from Europe; they have national cultures and regional cultures, and the more we erase them, the more we erase those aspects of their culture, the more that we erase the class differences, the more I think, in my opinion, we fall into the trap of the extreme right, which is saying that all whites have a common identity, and it is in opposition to all people of color. And that's the premise for the alt-right. That's the premise that Trump keeps feeding, which is the potential is there for race war, and whites have got to join together in order to defend themselves against this attack that's coming. And it's not just happening in the United States. It's going on in a lot of the European countries. Right-wing governments have taken over on the basis of the threat of immigration, and it's true in Russia as well. There are ultra nationalists in Russia, and Putin has been feeding and financing much of the European what we call in this country the alt-right. He's been feeding it, so financing it and promoting it. So when we get into this idea about if we fall into this paradigm that there's a white race, or there's white identity, or there's some kind of a cultural essence of whiteness, we are really shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, David,
So
I agree with you to a large extent.
Yeah.
But from the perspective of a person of color.
Yeah.
And right. I grew up in a a lot how you look at the world, I believe, really has to do with where you stand. I think relativity is real universally. White people, to me, were never one large group. And because I grew up in a multi-ethnic culture, it wasn't white people, it was like Jewish people, it was Italians, it was Irish, it was Polish people, it was various groups, and more recently, Russians. And believe it or not, and a lot of people don't realize this, interacting with these people for a person of color were very, very different. And it didn't matter even if you weren't black, because I raised 2 Chinese children born in Malaysia. And I predicted to them that their closest friends among so-called white people would be Jewish people, because they tended to be, not universally, but tended to be more open. And it happened. I mean, you have to deal with people historically. The American historical experience is very different from Europe. The very famous and late poet I knew very well, Amiri Baraka, once said that we needed to get out of Europe, get out of European ideology, and look at American history as the basis for our analysis. And this was a card-carrying communist, but he said that to look at America, and in the American experience, we have both class, where we all have been divided along, and let's make that clear. The inequality in this country is now the largest in the industrialized world. This impacts people of color. It impacts poor white people. It impacts middle class people of color. It impacts middle class white people. So everybody's affected by it. What I like to focus on are the strategies. How do we deal with these divisions, the perceptions of whiteness, the perceptions of blackness, the perceptions of brownness, and how we maximize our political, social, and cultural interest in this particular society that we were in? And that's where the alliances come in.
Let me jump in right there, John, because I think you made a very valid point. I attended one of David's classes just recently, and there was a Black woman in one of his classes that made a comment about she did not like to be called Black. And it startled me. I was actually sitting in the back of the room, and it startled me because I love being called Black. Like, she said she's African American, and she was adamant about it. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with either, but I don't want to take away from the Blackness, the Black experience, and what it took for us to be proud to be Black, And so when we talk about race and erasing white, I don't want to erase Black. I love being Black. So how do we have this dialogue? And David, when you say that whiteness isn't necessarily real, it's a made up construct, Blackness is real to me and a lot of other Black people. It's very real to us.
Okay. Yeah, I know exactly where she's coming from. Okay. Because this was a big discussion during the late 60s and early 70s, when there was a discussion of moving beyond the term Black to African American. Argument number one, there's no such place as Black land. Now, some people would say a Kibalon, which is a name for Africa, which was really actually derived from the Romans, but later adopted among peoples in Africa. But what people like her like to say is we don't, we need to identify with our historical origins in Africa. That it's not an attack on Blackness. Blackness is a political position. It's a political identity.
Yeah.
But it's not like, and yeah, Black Power, Ungawa, it's a political identity, but it's not biologic. It's not historical. Look, I got tons of white blood in me because I had some pretty women in the slave cabins. They couldn't keep out. But that's the reality of it. I know who some of them are. I know the names of the family. One of them is Crucius. Yeah, I said it over the air, the Crucius family. They got to my great-great-grandmother. But my point is that that's not a division, it's a perspective. I would suspect that she came through an Africana Studies program at some point, and where people like John Henrik Clarke, Dr. Benjo Cannon, and Ivan von Sertima, some of the leading scholars of the 70s and 80s, did want us to move past the term Black to African American. I think that we have to use those terms interchangeably, because what we're really doing is communicating, and we have to communicate in terms that people understand. It's like in the jazz world, some people don't want to call it jazz. Well, what are you going to call it? African American music? I mean, it's like, talk what people understand and then lead them beyond it.
Yeah.
So I think that David's concept is doing the same thing. He's doing the same thing. He's saying that whiteness, I mean, it's not a real identity. European American is, just like Blackness and African American. It's the same argument. David's making that same fundamental.
No, I'm not. I don't agree with you, John. And the reason is that there is a term. I mean, the person that I studied and learned from is Theodore William Allen, who wrote a book called The Invention of the White Race, as you know. And that is the title itself is an indication of what he was talking about. First of all, he doesn't say the invention of whiteness or white identity or anything like that. He's talking about the white race. He also is saying, and he says this very, very emphatically, that the white race is not a social construct or not simply a social construct. That's become a truism in academic circles. Everybody is everything, and everybody is a social construct. But what Allen says is that around the time of the late 17th century in the Virginia colony, once there was a tremendous intensification of class struggle and ended in a rebellion, 1676, Bacon's Rebellion, that there was a transformation that began to take place in the ruling elite. It began a little bit before, but the main point that he's making is that the white race was invented by this plantation-owning ruling class that ran the colony. They were the ones who were in charge. They were the ones who were in the House of Burgesses, as was called, the Parliament. And they created a color line that involved not providing benefits for those Europeans who were indentured servants, but actually what they did was they downgraded the status of African Americans. There was no improvement in the condition of the indentured servants.
They were given the right to buy land for the first time. That was the improvement that was made. Because you know.
Okay, look,
I'll tell you who to read.
Let's not go into the details here. What I'm trying to get across is that this white race was a ruling class invention for the purposes of social control. It was not there to provide benefits for European Americans. If anything, in the 18th century, and this is in Ted's book. This is in, the two.
David. We're not disagreeing. That's what I'm trying to get you to say. We're not disagreeing at all. We're saying the same thing.
Okay. All I'm saying is that this entity, the white race, the ruling elites, the plantation elites, established it not for purposes that would serve the interests of the white servants, but that would transform them into a social control force.
Clearly.
And everything that grows out of that, and every ruling elite, as the ruling elites in this country have adapted and changed, technology has shifted. The ruling elites have gone from agricultural capitalism into industrial capitalism, and from there into finance capitalism. There have been adaptations and modifications to the white race as a social control formation. And one of the big modifications was that all of these people who came from Southern and Eastern Europe, who were either Greek Orthodox, Catholic, or Jewish, that came in at the end of the 19th century up until World War I, they were incorporated into this social control formation. And
talks about it right here in this book.
Yeah. Okay.
So exactly.
David and John, I want you guys to bring it back to the topic at hand: white fragility. Can we round it out and bring it back to the topic of white fragility? The history and debate that all day, but let's get back to white fragility.
If you don't have that paradigm, that this is not a benefit, that what it is your European Americans being recruited into a social control formation that ends up being the deputy of the ruling elite that actually perpetrates and carries out the oppressive and repressive actions that keep not only people of color subordinated, but also the European American working people. So they are actually shooting themselves. This is European American circular firing squad, and until this idea of white fragility really is coming out of a misunderstanding of the role of the privileges that whites that European Americans have foisted on them, put upon them, as a way of maintaining their status. Now, their status.
David, please let me jump in. Please.
All right, well, wait, just let me finish. All right, their status has nothing to do with their condition of being exploited. They are exploited but privileged. Okay, and the privilege. The more you see this privilege as being a benefit, the less likely it is that you're going to be able to reach these folks. That's the underlying thing. So fragility has nothing to do with it.
Okay, David, remember, you're looking at it from the perspective of a white man.
No,
you got to understand there's more than one narrative. Hear me out. You're looking, there's more than one narrative. You're coming out of basically a neo-Marxist perspective. But there are other perspectives
on me, John, and I'm not.
That's what Alan is. Hear me out. Listen to me. There are other perspectives. We were not disagreeing. I know very specifically. I've read Alan. I generally agree with him. His point dates before Alan about the Bacon's Rebellion in Alice. Howard Zinn was the first person to really talk about that in academia, in his book, A People's History of the United States. But going forward, what I think that getting back to the fragility, we're talking about from a very practical. For us as Black people, for us as brown people, this is a survival issue. We have to understand, because when Tamara's talking about white fragility, what she's saying is a number of things. Backlash is how white folks react to us, depending on how we approach them. This is a reality. This is something that is very difficult for white people to understand. When we encounter a white person on a daily basis, we have to first assess that white person. Does they look like they're going to be friendly, accepting of us? Do they look like they're going to be hostile toward us? This is an existential reality for us, and which is primary to any class analysis. The benefit, when we talk about benefits, the biggest benefit, again, is psychological benefit. They don't have to go through that. They don't even know what that is. I was explaining that to a young man named Kyle on my Facebook page. I think Tamara saw it this past week. We had a long discussion. He got it eventually. The idea of feeling that you don't belong, that you don't fit in, that people are going to judge you by what you look like as opposed to who you are as a human being. This is crucial. So when we talk about white fragility, Black opportunity, we're talking about ways of addressing the fear that you mentioned of white folks pragmatically. It's using the benefits of a pluralist model as opposed to simply a class struggle model, and saying, okay, there's some issues that we maybe agree on. We may not get to the goal of getting free of this oppression by the ruling elite. But let me give you a metaphor. We're in a lake. We're in a boat. That boat is leaking. And we're a long way from shore. What do? You bail, and hopefully something better will come along because you're trying to keep afloat. And what do you do if you're heading toward a waterfall? You still bail and do the best you can to keep afloat. Hopefully something better will come along. That's been the history of our people. For generations, we've gone over the waterfall. People have gone over the waterfall. But we still have to look for practical situations. Obamacare is a good example of that.
Yeah. Let's
Where
take
the,
this caller, John. Before we get too deep in, we have a caller on the line. Let's
okay.
see with a question and or comment. Caller, are you with us?
Hey, greetings.
Hello.
Yes, greetings. My name is, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my name is Brother Warren calling from New Orleans, and I was listening to the conversation. And I've heard these conversations before, and I think from a historical timeline standpoint, the development of whiteness does not begin in the English-speaking world. We see this start with the Portuguese and the Spanish in the Caribbean and what becomes Central and South America. The caste system that the Spaniards developed in Mexico, in Peru, was based on whiteness being at the top of the caste. It actually evolved on the Iberian Peninsula as they purged the Moors from the Iberian Peninsula. So the British world actually comes in at a later date in developing this concept of whiteness. In fact, the word Negro that was used in English was taken from the Portuguese and Spanish because they had a head start in the transatlantic slave trade before the British. So as commodities, black had become commodities, the English-speaking world adapted the word Negro that was applied to the Africans.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I mean, the Spanish had different class. It was the difference between the way the British and the Spanish and Portuguese colonized. Very, very different. The British were snobbish. We are not going to have anybody that's not pure English in our midst. Where the Spanish, they created all these different levels, mestizo, all these different categories of people. The same way the Dutch did in South Africa with colors, all these different levels. And they placed a hierarchy. And it definitely is a caste system. But we're talking about it in America. It was created, as David and I both, agree, within the colonies. But there's no question that clearly South America, the Caribbean, and Brazil, which had more slaves brought to it than the United States. Brazil is the second largest African populated country in the world. The only country who has more Africans is Nigeria. No other country in Africa has more Africans than Brazil. So you're 100% correct, caller. And I agree with you totally.
Okay, white fragility. Let's bring it back full circle. I love the history. But let's bring it back full circle. White fragility. You don't believe that this is actually real. I believe that it is, but go ahead.
Yeah. Let's take an anecdote that Robin DiAngelo uses in her journal article, and see if we can maybe take it from there. When she talks about doing a workshop with her partner, in which a woman, a European American woman, was began to have, after listening to her presentation about white privilege, began to have what appeared to everyone as a heart attack. Her heart was racing. She couldn't catch her breath. All of these other things. And DiAngelo, who was saying things about white privilege, said, "Well, this is how I identified what's going on with white people when they hear about racism. They become very, very agitated, and they can't stand listening to the conversation, to the point where this woman began to have what turned out to be an anxiety attack. And so from that, she extrapolated. I'm sure, I'm making this terribly oversimplified because she has a lot of research, yada, yada. But my response to that is to say that the implicit in that context, in that anecdote, is that DiAngelo was saying that that white people have to give up their privilege. And my thought was, this is not a sign of fragility. This woman was presented with an alternative, and she was ready to give up or hold on to her privilege, and she was ready to face death rather than to accept this this consequence. So that, to me, does not seem like fragility. If somebody is facing what they think is a heart attack, rather than go along with this idea of giving up privilege, they are indicating some fierce tenacity of
But I interject there. She has a
right?
panic attack. A panic attack is
No,
not.
she thought it was a heart attack.
Yeah, I know that's what happens when you have panic attacks.
Okay, well,
It's biologic. It's genetic. I
that
suffer from them. I know what
yeah,
what they're about.
okay,
That
but
is a different thing, David.
not know that she thought she was having a heart attack.
Of
And
course.
my point is that when you talk about white fragility, what you are talking about sometimes is the ability to engage in passive, aggressive behavior, passive resistance to the challenge to your privilege. And what I'm suggesting on top of that is that part of the reason that kind of response is provoked is because there is no other way of looking at the privilege except as an essential part of your identity, that defines who you are, your being. Talk about existential, right? This is what the assumption is behind all of this information about white fragility. And what I'm saying is that is like, it's like a belief in God. If you do or don't believe in God, is your individual assessment of the way that you relate to the universe. But the belief in God, that is that faith and religion play an extremely powerful role in people's lives. That's something that you can't get away from.
Okay, David, let me jump in right there. Fragility. I wanted to look up the actual definition of fragility. The quality of being easily broken or damaged, the quality of being delicate or vulnerable. So
Yeah,
when we say white fragility, like you just said, when we talk about race or racism and race relations, how white people are, it makes them uncomfortable to the extent that they really can't handle the conversation. So when I say white fragility is real, it is real.
yeah, but
Very much so.
you're using a term, easily broken, easily damaged. I'm saying that when a black person moves into a white neighborhood, like what happened in Levittown on Long Island, or in Levittown in Pennsylvania, north of Philly, and white people burned down black people's houses. How are you going to look at that as fragility?
Okay,
Because
David,
that's
please
fear.
let me respond to this.
Okay, go
Please
ahead. Go
let me
ahead.
respond to this. Okay, when we moved from Brooklyn to Staten Island on March 8th of 1962 and moved into the house, we didn't realize that the only other black family on the block, their house had been bombed 2 years ago. Their first cousin was over my house the last 2 or 3 days visiting from New York. This is a real reality. The fragility comes in that psychologically, and that's what I think that we have to focus on. This is a psychological phenomenon. It's not based just in class struggle. It's psychological. Marx was before Freud. It's psychological. They are doing this bombing because they feel threatened. I couldn't think of a better or a more central case of fragility than being threatened. Their reaction is violent. People many times reaction to threats violently. That's where the fragility is. Some people
Yeah,
have
and
panic attacks. Some people put bombs in people's houses.
yeah, and
Some people
what I
stomp you.
and that's all that I'm saying about this issue is that that to view it through that lens really leads, first of all, it has underlying assumptions to it, which is that that for white working people, the struggle of people of color for equality is an existential threat. That's all that I'm saying.
No, I
And
hear what you're saying.
when
They
you
may
see
believe
that,
it's
when
an
you see that, as people
existential threat.
falling apart and weeping and getting panic attacks and doing all of this other stuff, you're not you are accepting that cultural assumption, which is
Not
that this is an
necessarily, David.
existential
Not
threat.
necessarily. I think you're looking at it as a too black and white issue. The fact that the reality is that everyone except the elite is oppressed in America, we know that. They don't see that reality. Understand, they identify with the ruling elite. That is what the creation of whiteness after Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 was
Yeah,
about. That's why
and
they gave them the ability
that's
to buy
where I
land.
disagree
They
with you.
created a status or a caste privilege.
Yeah,
In
and
America, we're dealing with caste and class. The Marxist class analysis does
I have.
not work. And Delgado has written an excellent treatise on critical race studies. She's the successor to Dr. Derek Bell in critical race studies. And that's what she talks about. The fact that the reality of perception is as important as the actual economic reality. And that's where I think that we are having our disagreement.
And all of this really stems from Du Bois, page 700 in Black Reconstruction, where he talks about the psychological wage, which he does not use that term. Yeah, John, holding up books is
No,
you know
because people can see
I'm
what it is. What you're
yeah
talking about, David.
I'm saying this just to say that Du Bois never used the expression psychological wage. He
Free
talked about
Freud.
a
Until
social and psychological wage. And that section of the book, 700 to 701, if people read it through, those 2 pages, they will see that what Du Bois is talking about is fundamentally different from the way that it has been interpreted, as is the case of the way that you characterized the.
understand, Du Bois evolved and rejected Marxism by the 1940s. This book was his doctoral thesis. You have to follow a Du Bois' whole career.
Okay,
My
I
grandfather and great aunt knew Du Bois, as well as E. Philip
okay,
Randolph.
I
These
I'm,
people
I'm
are
So,
connected.
so, so
My
let me
point to you,
ask.
what I'm
Let
saying
me.
to you,
I'm gonna put them in timeout for just a moment, y'all. Just for a moment.
here's the
David. Let me jump in real quick. So, this conversation today is about white fragility, and black and brown opportunity. And I want us to go to the next part of this because we've like really dominated the conversation with this white fragility and really trying to hone in on what it is and what it isn't and how we dissect this thing and really kind of, you know, pull it apart and figure out how we attack this and how we work together in solidarity, as David likes to say. But let's go to the flip side of this. How is it a black and brown opportunity? John, I want you to jump in. Let's talk about, and black and brown opportunity. David, chime in. How do we, as black and brown people, John, how do we see this moment in time, this moment in history where Trump and the fear of this Republican, agenda and all that white people are afraid of, the fragility, all that they are afraid of, this is a golden opportunity for black and brown people if we harness this moment, harness our political power, and start to work together in solidarity with our white allies.
okay. The Senate race in Alabama is a good example of what can be done. Black women surged out and voted.
Mhm.
A significant, not a majority, but a significant amount of white women joined in. And I truly believe that from a pragmatic standpoint, that we have to not look at white people as being this monolithic white group. And that's where David and I definitely agree. We have, I believe, like the so-called soccer mom phenomenon, white middle class suburban women, there are a lot of issues that we share in common, especially the working moms, the people who are working in diners, restaurants. These working women, they are natural allies. So if we focus on specific issues that can affect people's real lives today, tomorrow. That's what President Obama did with the Affordable Care Act, and it was a tremendous backlash against it, but he was able to get some things through, which has saved people's lives. We're not going for all the time the whole ball and wax. Some people right now want to see DACA passed in the Republican Party. We've got to work with anybody who will work with us. This is about survival. We're in the middle of that pond on that boat and it's leaking, and we're heading toward that waterfall. We need to focus on specific issues where there is an interest convergence between ourselves and others and join forces on them.
David, how do we get our white allies to do that? Like, how do we get our white allies to really?
Because the best example I can think of was the Civil Rights Movement. During the Civil Rights Movement, it was totally necessary to have northern white industrialists and globalists side with black people to end legal segregation, because the portrayal of the United States as this racist country, the images of dogs biting people on television, did not help the United States. In fact, it hurt the United States, gave tools to the United States in the war against communism.
So, David, how do we do it? Jump in. How do we get white people to get on board in this day and age after the Civil Rights Movement? How do we get them? How do we do this?
First of all, we've got to stop calling them allies. The Indigenous American movement 5 years ago put out a manifesto that said, we do not want allies, we want accomplices. Okay? The implication of allies is that you have different interests. And that's one of the problems that I have, although I do think that it's very important to think both strategically and tactically, that interest conversion is a tactic. It's not a strategy. All right. And what I would say different from the way that that John is formulating, and maybe I'm misunderstanding his metaphor about the leaking boat, but I would say that if the leaking boat includes European American working people, they're just up at the end of the leaking boat that is not sinking in the water, but it's the same boat. Okay, that's where we part ways. I don't see that. Our lives are much more in danger, and I understand, David. You have never walked into a supermarket and watched people look at you. You have never walked down the street with your Asian wife and the people look at her and say hello and ignore you. This is existentially a real life survival thing for people of color. It's really different. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying those realities.
We're not all in the same boat, is all I'm saying. We're all not in the same boat.
Yeah.
We have the same oppressor. I agree.
The point that I'm making here, John, is that there are two, if we want to put it in binary terms, there are two different strata in the working class in this country. One is a group of people who are both exploited and racially oppressed. The other group is a group that is both exploited and racially privileged. And those privileges do not provide benefits. The only thing that they provide is the offer from the ruling elite that if you do this for us, that is maintain your role as the oppressors and subordinators of the other strata of the working class, then we will give you the possibility that you can leave the working class, leave your own exploitation. And the possibility is not a reality for 90% of the working people. We have to take a look at, here's the demographics as I see it. There is a 0.1% that is the ruling elite. Then there's 9.9% people who are making $200,000 a year and up, who are a middle strata. And that group is 95% white, European American. Those people get actual benefits from the system. They are the ones, the doctors and the lawyers and the business owners with 10 or 15 employees who have several $1 million in net worth. They are protected. They are protected by the system. That's what I was saying last week about doctors and lawyers. They are protected from the globalization of the economy. Their position in this country is that doctors from other countries and lawyers from other countries cannot come here and practice the profession. So
it's a monopoly. But David, for the average Black person, look at the difference in economic assets between, just say, middle-class Black people and middle-class white people. It's dramatic. Household wealth the difference is dramatic. What we're talking about here is a simple thing like going to get a job. If you have a white person and a Black person of equal employment and qualifications, the white person is going to get the job, and more times than not. That is privilege. There's no way we can get around that. That is privilege. When it comes to moving into a neighborhood with good schools, redlining still exists. Black people are steered in certain neighborhoods. Monies for those neighborhoods are not equally spent as compared to the monies in middle-class white neighborhoods. We're not dealing with a working class and a ruling class. Okay. We're dealing with very different degradations of people. Okay. And white people have a privilege in that they don't have to walk down the street and be scared when they see a police like I do, a policeman or a policewoman like I do. They can live in neighborhoods where it's very difficult for me. I remember we were moving from New York to Atlanta and asking the housing director, who was an African-American woman, where could I live? Because
how do we get from privilege to from fragility to privilege?
Well, I would stay with
get there. This conversation is about white fragility and
let's stay
opportunity.
Fragility is what happens when you confront a white person as a person of color with the realities of your everyday life. They generally don't want to hear it. They become, and especially if you say, no, we have our agenda. We're not going to vote for you. We're not going to support you unless you do what we want you to do, because we are your bosses.
That's what harnessing our political power as Black and brown people. When we talk about the opportunity, how do we harness that political power? Voting is a strategy.
Yes.
And people, people always talk about, and I go back to what they keep saying, how people die for our right to vote. People, the dogs and the water hoses. Like, yes, this all happened, but voting is a strategy. And not all Democrats are good, and not all Republicans are bad. And we
should stop. We should
about how we vote.
Who don't vote. They don't vote because they don't see a benefit for them in voting, because they know the same politicians come to the neighborhood, say the same rap, and leave, and nothing changes in their everyday life.
That's right.
We have to hold politicians accountable. Now, you know the word I want to use, but folks, Tamara said I can't use the word punishment for politicians that don't do what we say them to do. I believe in that, but we'll hold them accountable by voting their behinds out of office.
That's right. We have the power as Black and brown people. This is an opportunity in this 2018 and these midterms that are coming up. This is an opportunity for Black and brown people. So when I see people on social media that are, David, I know you don't like white fragility, but it's real. When I see people that are saying things like, making people afraid or trying to, they're fear with other people so they can be afraid not to vote. Or we're Black and brown people are not afraid not to vote. Like, we are not afraid not to vote. Like, that does not scare us. We, like I said, we're always behind the 8 ball. We're always on the losing end of the. So we're not afraid of this. So that doesn't, shaming and guilting us into voting does not work. The opportunity that we have in this 2018 and in these midterms, harnessing our political power and getting behind candidates and elected officials who have our interests and are going to in our agenda. They're going to work for us. Period. And I don't. Honestly, it's like I say, all Democrats are not good, because I will not be voting for all Democrats, and all Republicans ain't bad. So I could just tell you that we have to be strategic as Black and brown people. This is a golden opportunity in this age of politics. Right?
No, I agree with you 100%. And we have to, right now, there's a possibility of electing a Democratic House of Representatives. That would be a wonderful thing. I want to see that happen. But I'm not happy with Nancy Pelosi at all. I'm angry at Chuck Schumer. I was talking to my friend who's a labor organizer yesterday about, challenging Chuck Schumer, working to get rid of him. He agrees with me because of what he did to DACA students. And Pelosi attacking Maxine Waters. Oh, we're all fired up about that. She needs to be held accountable, punished. She needs to be held accountable, punished.
David, jump in, because you're sitting quietly over there.
I mean, the premises of the conversation are making it difficult for me to enter into the conversation.
Why, David? Now explain that, because you make a statement and then why would you say that? No.
Well, as I said, I don't think that the premise, and I really can't get there from where we are right now. The premise or the operating principle of acting, that is doing political organizing on the basis of the privileges that European American working people have are real, that they actually serve their interests, is to me a losing proposition. Just in practical terms, I don't think it's the reality either. When you talk about net worth, family net worth, and you don't break down the European Americans by class to see a difference between those who are in the 9.9% and the rest of us, what you get is a very skewed picture. But
when you break it down, David, by class, you are exactly doing that. Just as I mentioned before, you compare the white middle class and the Black middle class, the white working class and the Black and brown working class.
I don't accept your definition of middle class.
Well, I'm using the ones that are universally accepted. I am not a Marxist. I'm not going to take that definition that you're using.
What did you say?
I said that you're using a Marxist analysis, or what we call a neo-Marxist analysis of class. I think that is outdated.
It's what?
Outdated.
Outdated. Okay. Let me put forward my.
Okay. Hold that thought. Hold that thought, David. Hold that thought. So really, this conversation today, because we're like literally at the top of the hour. Let me share with the audience why I love John and why I love David, because they come from different perspectives, and sometimes they meet in the middle, and sometimes they don't. And I love the fact that we get to have these sometimes these polar opposites, these conversations that are like from one extreme to the other, all rooted in history and interpretation of our history and America's history. So I love this conversation, but what I want to share with you guys as we get to the top of the hour is what's next for us. John, actually, I'm going to put it on the screen, has a YouTube channel that he has just recently started called Armwood Opinion, right, Mr. John?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Armwood Opinion is on YouTube. Go to YouTube, watch his videos. You'll get a deeper insight to his historical understanding and his knowledge. I love these conversations. David and I, we are working on Acknowledge the Divide. This is where David breaks it down to our white brothers and sisters that, you know, race is a made up construct. Race is something that, you know, the white race is invented. We need to fix this and we need to figure it out. So David and I are working on a series called Acknowledge the Divide, Black and excuse me, I can't remember, but Acknowledge the Divide. Go to the website. It's tamarashili.com/acknowledge the divide. The dates are Thursday, September the 13th, Thursday, September 27th, Thursday, October 11th, and Thursday, October 25th. This is an online platform where our white allies can come to a safe space, and have these conversations with David where we break it down. And David is a master at what he does when it comes to talking about this issue of whiteness and this made up construct. So this is what we're doing. Be a part of it. You know, like I said, these conversations get very intense. I love David and I love John because you never know where this is going. But David, since I interrupted you, I want to give you the last minute to just kind of like wrap up where you were going with what you were going to say.
Well, I am making the point that there is a group that is 95% white, that is the 9.9% of in the income quintiles, in other words, deciles, the top 9.9% that actually gets benefits from this system. All right, they are the people, and those are not racial benefits. Those are benefits on the basis of their being in this class position that they are in. They are protected by the elites in terms of taxes and education and all of the other things, the right zip code and everything that John is talking about, which I think bleeds over, that erases the distinction between those people and the rest of the European Americans who are in the working class. And the way that you could define class in this country is racial. In other words, these are the people whose privileges are not class privileges. They're racial privileges, and they mean next to nothing except in terms of what they are not. In other words, they are not attacked by the police. They are not put in neighborhoods that are essentially isolated and subordinated. They are not. In other words, they are defining themselves entirely in terms of what they are not, and the absence of a real, legitimate, authentic identity is the absence of class consciousness. Because if they were class conscious, they would see, as the metaphor that you reject, John, is that they are just in the part of the boat that when as it's sinking is going up. It's
I do disagree they're in the boat. I do disagree that they're in the boat. I definitely disagree.
We have a disagreement about that, about being in the same boat.
No, I definitely disagree on that.
And that's the point that Du Bois is making, that Frederick Douglass is making, that Lerone Bennett is making, is that there is one working class in this country. That is a line of thinking that goes through from Douglass to Hubert Harrison to Du Bois to Lerone Bennett.
And you know what? This I'm gonna stop you, David, right there. This
we totally
part two. I'm gonna stop you right there, and I'm gonna give you 30 seconds to just kind of say, we'll be back for part two. But tell us again about Armwood's opinion on YouTube and what your channel is all about.
Okay, what it is looking at the intersection of technology, race, and economics. How they have played together and how they're playing together right now to preserve the power structure here as it is and around the world. I'm not just looking at the United States. I've already talked about how the war against Japan caused the end of slavery to be ordered by the Attorney General on December 12th of 1941, a week after the attack, Circular 3591. How that the civil rights movement coincided with the fight against communism, and then how the certain elites in the media and in the business community, the globalists, were able to see an interest in working with people of color to break down the legal barriers to segregations. That's what led to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So looking at it in a pure class analysis, you can't see it that way. That's to be a gross oversimplification of, we have to look at the American Bible. And I end with saying, get out of Europe, as Baraka used to always say, get out of Europe. We're Americans. So let's look at America. And I end with, as usual, resistance is not futile.
All right. Thank you, John. Thank you, David. Thank you, guys. We're literally at the top of the hour. I want to thank you for tuning in this week. Every Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, we will go to the website. It's tamarashealy.com. There's some blogs there. You can always find us on YouTube and Blog Talk Radio, and we're there. So come check us out. And John and David, it's never a dull moment. I think this probably needs to be a part 2. This got a little.
Oh, this was fun, David.
This was a little intense. I don't know if it was fun for David. David, did you have fun?
He didn't have fun.
Stay tuned, everybody. Part 2. We're gonna come back and continue this conversation around midterms.
I'm used to that. I like this.
Midterms, white fragility, and black and brown opportunity, withholding the vote, acknowledging the divide. We're having some very candid and real serious conversations about how we win as people in these United States. So again, I am Tamara Johnson Shealy. You can go to my website. There is actually a sign up button there to join our mailing list, be a part of all that we are doing to make this country a better place for all of us. Again, have a great afternoon, and we will see you next week, Friday, same time, same channel. Bye-bye.